This LOS is Describe Limitations of Monetary Policy. Limitations of monetary policy. Problems may arise in the monetary policy transmission mechanism. Such channels as asset prices, interest rates, expectations, and exchange rates may not be efficient means. A liquidity trap is an example of a problem in transmission. A liquidity trap occurs when market participants hold large cash balances, so changes in the money supply will not affect real activity. One policy mechanism is quantitative easing, QE, which is an increase in the money supply intended to stimulate the economy. QE can take different forms. For example, purchase of specific securities such as mortgage bonds. A risk of QE is that if the securities with credit risk are purchased, the central bank is taking on a significant risk. We'll just take a minute here to look at the blue box example in the ebook. So this is example 17 from the reading, and it's talking about government debt deficits in Ricardo. So the total stock of government debt is the outstanding stock of IOUs issued by a government and not yet repaid. They are issued when the government has insufficient tax revenues to meet expenditures and has to borrow from the public. The size of the outstanding debt equals the cumulative quantity of net borrowing it has done, and the fiscal or budget deficit is added in the current period to the outstanding stock of debt. If the outstanding stock of debt falls, we have a negative deficit or a surplus. If a government reduces taxation by 10 billion in 1 year and replaces that revenue with borrowing 10 billion from the public, will it have any real impact on the economy? The important issue here is how people perceive that action. Do they recognize what will happen over time as interest and bond principal have to be repaid out of future taxes? If so, they may think of the bond finance as equivalent to delayed taxation finance. Thus, the reduction in current taxation will have no impact on spending because individuals save more in anticipation of higher future taxes to repay the bond. This is called Ricardian Equivalence after the economist David Ricardo. If people do not correctly anticipate all the future taxes required to pay the additional government debt, then they will feel wealthier when the debt is issued and may increase their spending, adding to aggregate demand. Whether Ricardian equivalent holds in practice is ultimately an empirical issue and is difficult to calibrate conclusively given the number of things that are changing at any time in a modern economy. So anyhow, I just wanted to point out again the importance of going back and reading these blue box examples, because definitely there could be some questions with regards to the Ricardian equivalence, etc. So we'll do a quick practice question. Which of the following is a limitation on the ability of central banks to stimulate growth in periods of deflation? A, Ricardian equivalence, B, the interaction of monetary and fiscal policy, or C, the fact that interest rates have a minimum value at 0%. Okay, this was a bit of a tricky question, and that's why I showed the Ricardian equivalence before I jumped into this. Some people might think that A is the correct answer, but the key here is with regards to the periods of deflation. So C is correct. Deflation poses a challenge to conventional monetary policy because once the central bank has cut nominal interest rates to 0 to stimulate the economy, they cannot cut them further. So a bit of a tricky question. Okay, one last quick practice question to finish this LOS. The least likely limitation to the effectiveness of monetary policy is that central banks cannot A, accurately determine the neutral rate of interest, B, regulate the willingness of financial institutes to lend, or C, control amounts that economic agents deposit into banks. Okay, this question is not too difficult. You just have to be sure that you're looking at the least likely. Anytime you see the least likely, I always would underline it and start, and I'm looking for the false. I'm going to turn these into a true or false question. I'm looking for the false. Okay, so I'd read it. The least likely limitation to the effectiveness of monetary policy is that central banks cannot. And then I would read the end of the sentence. Central banks cannot regulate the willingness of financial institutions to lend. That's true. And central banks cannot control the amounts that economic agents deposit into the banks. That's true. Central banks cannot accurately determine The neutral rate of interest? No, that is false, okay? So A is correct. So turn these into, look for the least likely, turn them into a true or false, look for the false. So it's the inability to determine exactly the neutral interest rate does not necessarily limit the power of monetary policy. So a quick review, the neutral rate of interest is the interest rate that neither encourages nor discourages growth. So the neutral rate equals the trend growth plus the inflation target, okay? Turn it into a true or false. We had 2 trues there, 1 false. So the correct answer is A. And that's the last slide for this LOS. Thank you.